across the isolated Montana landscape, carrying razor-sharp crystals of snow that scraped against the weathered windows of the Jensen farmhouse. Margaret Jensen stood perfectly still, her reflection barely visible in the frost-covered glass, her pale fingers tracing delicate patterns against the cold surface. The farmhouse had been her prison and sanctuary for 17 years, a remote sanctuary tucked deep within the snow-covered wilderness of the Bitterroot Valley. Her husband, Thomas, was a man of few words and precise movements, a rancher whose silence spoke volumes about the generations of hardship etched into the land. The wooden floorboards creaked with decades of accumulated weight, telling stories of winters survived and secrets buried beneath layers of snow and family history. Margaret's world was defined by routine, morning chores, carefully prepared meals, and the endless maintenance of a life that seemed suspended between reality and a dreamlike isolation. The surrounding landscape offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of her complete detachment from the outside world. Endless white stretched in every direction, creating a perfect canvas of emptiness that seemed to breathe with its own mysterious rhythm. Old farming equipment, half buried in snow, stood like silent sentinels, witnesses to whatever unspoken narrative lived within the walls of this remote homestead. Margaret's movements were calculated, almost mechanical, yet beneath her composed exterior bubbled a complex network of emotions that she had learned to suppress. The photographs on the walls told a fragmented story, generations of Jensen women, their eyes holding the same distant, knowing look that Margaret now carried. Something about this place, about her life, felt like a carefully constructed illusion, ready to fracture at the slightest unexpected touch. The first signs of disruption began subtly, like whispers carried on the winter wind. Margaret discovered an old, leather-bound journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, its pages filled with cryptic notes and genealogical records that seemed to contradict everything she knew about her family's history. The handwriting shifted between neat cursive and frantic, almost illegible scrawls, creating a narrative that felt fragmented and deeply unsettling. Thomas's behavior became increasingly erratic, his usual stoic demeanor giving way to moments of intense, unexplained tension. He would stand for hours staring out the window, his body rigid, watching something Margaret could never see. The farm's livestock began to behave strangely. Cattle huddled in tight clusters, sheep refused to leave the barn, and the working dogs maintained an unnatural, watchful silence that felt more like a warning than mere animal instinct. Strange markings appeared around the property, intricate symbols carved into fence posts, subtle patterns etched into the snow that seemed to move and shift when Margaret wasn't directly looking. Her attempts to discuss these discoveries with Thomas were met with cold, dismissive silence, his eyes holding a warning that went beyond mere marital disagreement. The isolation of the farm began to feel less like a choice and more like a carefully constructed trap. Margaret's collection of family photographs started to change, subtle alterations that she couldn't quite explain. Faces seemed to blur, edges of images became distorted, and in the backgrounds, shadowy figures began to emerge that had never been there before. The boundary between reality and something else began to dissolve like snow under an unseasonably warm sun. Margaret discovered a hidden room in the basement, a space that defied the farmhouse's known dimensions, filled with artifacts that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Generations of Jensen family memorabilia lay preserved in perfect condition. clothing, journals, photographs, each item holding a weight of unspoken history that seemed to breathe with its own consciousness. Thomas's true nature began to reveal itself in fractured moments of terrifying clarity. Margaret realized he was not merely her husband, but a guardian of something far more complex, a lineage that stretched beyond conventional understanding of family and inheritance. The farm was more than land. It was a vessel, a container for generational secrets that demanded preservation at any cost. Her own body began to change in subtle ways. Memories that were not her own started to surface. Experiences of women who had occupied this same space, who had made the same meals, walked the same floors. The line between Margaret Jensen and the women who came before her became increasingly blurred, as if she were simply the latest manifestation of a recurring narrative. The snow outside began to take on strange configurations, forming patterns that seemed to tell a story just beyond the edge of comprehension. Shadows moved within the whiteness, creating silhouettes of figures that existed between memory and imagination, watching, always watching. The final revelation came not with violence, but with a profound understanding that Margaret was never truly an individual, but a continuation of something much larger. The Jensen women were not victims, but carriers, preservers of a lineage that existed beyond conventional understanding of time, family, and survival. Thomas stood before her, no longer just a husband, but a conductor of a generational symphony, revealing the true nature of their existence. The farmhouse was a living entity, the snow a protective membrane, and Margaret was both the latest iteration and the key to continuing a cycle that had been maintained for generations. Her transformation was not a destruction, but a completion. The memories of previous Jensen women flowed through her like the winter wind, each story a thread in a complex tapestry of survival, sacrifice, and preservation. She understood now why the photographs always held that same distant, knowing look. They were witnesses to a narrative far greater than individual lives. As the snow continued to fall, creating a perfect white canvas around the farmhouse, Margaret became fully herself and something more. The boundaries between past and present, between individual and collective, dissolved completely. She was the Snow Wife, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of a legacy that would continue long after her own physical form had disappeared.